I'm going to be making bread. This is going to be a large loaf of bread. I make 3 sizes regularly. A small loaf, which uses 1 cup, 1 tablespoon, 1 teaspoon, and 2.5 combined. You'll see all of those ratios. Then I make a large loaf, which takes 1.5, which half again as much ingredient. And then I make a double loaf, which takes twice as much. I'm going to be making it in my stand mixer with a bread hook. And I will be going through all of the steps that I take. I, of course, will not have the video running while it's waiting or while it's just mixing. I'll turn that off for that time. But this will give you a feel for how the bread is made. A lot of times I will make this as an artisan loaf. When I work it, I will shape it onto a piece of parchment paper, and then I'll let it rise there, put it on a baking pan, and let it grow up kind of like a French bread loaf or something like that. I have begun back making the loaves in a baking pan, in a bread pan. Ceramic bread pans work the best. I've used glass, I've used metal, and I've used ceramic. And ceramic is totally my favorite. One of the problems that I had that made me switch from pans to artisan loaf was that the inside of the loaf wasn't getting as done as it should. And I found that there were a few things that I wasn't doing right that I have learned to do that make the bread come out much better. When you put the bread in the pan, it's best if you use butter or something similar on the bottom. Sometimes I'll use coconut oil, but most of the time I just use butter on the bottom of my pan. Another thing is to allow it to rise until it just begins to crown over the sides of the pan. If you let it get too big, the air bubbles get too large, and the handling of it, getting it into the oven, will often start breaking those air bubbles. And when they start breaking, it will cause the bread to condense. It will rise again, but it rises unevenly the second time. If it begins to break and condense, you have to take it out. You have to knead it again and then put it back in the pan and let it rise up to the crown again. Sometimes your bread will turn out kind of strange looking, but it usually turns out pretty good, even if it's a little strange looking. Another thing that causes bread to sink is not baking it at a low enough temperature for long enough. 350 is plenty low enough. When I make an artisan loaf, I cook it at 375. But when I cook in a bread pan, I cook at 350. And I will cook it until the top is quite dark brown. In cooking the artisan loaf, I tend to just get a light golden kind of crust on the top and stop at that point. And it's always done all the way through. But when you're baking in a pan, you have to let the top get just a little browner. Not burned at all, but just a little browner. And I think you'll see that when the bread is finished. I hope that you'll enjoy this, and thank you for coming along with me. Fresh bread, 1 cup. One half cup. The water should be a little bit warm. One tablespoon. A half tablespoon. Sugar. Raw sugar. One and a half teaspoons salt. 1 1/2 water. 1 1/2 tablespoons sugar. 1 1/2 teaspoons salt. One half cup whole gram flour. Three and 1/4 cups unbleached flour. One-third cup ground flaxseed. I've got to completely wipe out the tablespoon because you don't want to get any wheat into the yeast. So that's got to be completely clean. One tablespoon instant yeast. stand mixer, bread hook, okay. One tablespoon olive oil. We start out as soon as the ingredients make a ball in the bowl. We wait for 4 minutes, and then we start a cycle of 5, 3, 5, 3, and 5. You can see that it's getting pretty plastic. Yeah, pretty nice. This is the second wait period after the cycling begins. This is the third and final 5-minute cycle. As soon as the time is up on this, I will shut off the mixer and cover the bread, and it will need to rise for 20 minutes. I use the second setting on my KitchenAid for speed. The third can be used sometimes if the dough is not balling up like it should. The first can be used, but I like the second setting for the most part. Now I'm going to show you what has happened. I should have showed you the raised bread first. It has punched the bread down, and you'll notice that the bowl is very clean. By the second series, the bowl should be clean if you've got the right ingredients. Okay, there's what it looks like. That's pretty good. About a tablespoon of butter is more than plenty of butter. And I like to put it in first because it gets my hands just a little bit buttery. I don't like my hands too buttery. You'll notice that I'm getting the dish pretty buttery. And that may be just a little bit more than I want. Okay, now then I'm going to put that butter around on all those sides. I don't want to leave big hunks of butter anywhere, but I want it pretty buttery. On the bottom, in the corners. This loaf generally doesn't stick too bad. I've had it stick every now and then, but I just like the way it browns better and when we use the butter. Okay. And when I've got the butter on my hands, this tends to work a little better. Just kind of folding and folding and rolling and folding this bread. Just fold it, push it down, fold it, push it down, turn it, fold it, push it down. If you're a ceramicist, it's just exactly the same way you wedge clay. Except it's a lot easier than wedging clay. Okay. Now then, I'm going to stretch this out. I can make a small loaf in this pan. I have one smaller bread pan, and a small loaf fits in it very nicely. Usually, when I make the double loaf, it's for something like pizza or pastries that takes a little more dough. I don't generally make a bread loaf. It's a little unwieldy, a little hard to handle. Now, I'm going to put the bread cloth over the top of this and set it aside for about 20 to 30 minutes. While my bread is rising, I'm going to set my oven at 350. My larger oven takes a while to heat up, so it's good to give it a little bit of time. You can already see just by looking at it that there's a bow to the top. When I peel this back, you can see how it has crowned across the top of the bread. It is ready now to be put into the oven. So very carefully, so that I don't break the rise, I'm going to set it on the shelf, and I'm going to push the shelf in. And I'm going to check it after 20 minutes. It may not be finished in 20 minutes. It probably won't be, but I will want to check it at that point and see how it's doing. This looks a little lighter than it actually is, but it still needs a little more cooking before it's finished. I'm going to put it in and set my timer for 4 minutes. It's still a little darker, even in this light, but it's a good mellow brown, and it is ready to cool. Bread needs to be covered and cooled for at least 10 to 15 minutes before you try to slice it, preferably 30 minutes. I will put a list of the ingredients in the comments below. Thank you for joining me today in my kitchen.